Because the big thing is we still want her climbing a low grass.
Well, she's all curled up down there now.
Okay. Then we're probably okay.
Now she's looking up.
Because you're looking at her.
Okay, don't look at her.
Don't look at her.
Don't look at her. Don't look at her. Howdy and welcome, everyone. We are back. It's been a hot minute. This is Car Convos, the Drill Team Dynamics podcast, where we talk about drill team stuff like giant nerds. Apologies for the delay. It's been a long time wrapping up this incredibly long drill season and then getting set up for the summertime. We finally had an opportunity to sit down and talk about stuff. So here we are, and today we are talking about competition. This one we've been kind of sitting on and going back and forth about, but ultimately today's conversation is about competition and maybe what we can improve or do better with as an activity. Specifically, we're going to attack this from three different angles. I think we're going to attack this from the side of those who host a drill meet. So if you are a school or you're an instructor who hosts a drill meet, these are some of the things that you might consider thinking about. Maybe you already are thinking about them. Some things to think about from the hosting side. Then we're going to take it from the standpoint of the judging. So whether you are someone who briefs judges or you are someone who is going to judge a drill meet, here are some things that we can think about that would help make the activity better on that front. And then lastly, obviously, from the standpoint of competition, being a competitor. So if you're on a drill team or if you're an instructor leading a drill team or a coach or something like that, what can we do better on the participation side to make the competition experience better overall? So that's kind of the premise for today's conversation. So I guess this is a massive bear of a topic. Where do we want to start? Obviously, we're going to talk about the hosting side first. What should we start with?
I think before we start, I think it helps to lay out what the premise is or like where we're coming from with the entirety of the topic. Probably, instead of just like talking about, like, I think this will only make sense if you understand where we're coming from, because I think we're coming from somewhere very specific and we're trying to achieve something very specific.
So how would you, I would agree, I think that's probably the place to start. How would you encapsulate that in a nutshell?
Well, we've been doing this drill team training thing this is year 11.
Jeez, I think so, yeah.
And so obviously for us, we view the drill team activity from a very educational lens. You know, we started out as competitors and then we got into like the coaching thing, and and I think in a way when we started out coaching when we were young is we were still competitors, just we weren't the ones on the floor because we were no longer in high school. Well, in New York, but we competed at Worlds and did those type of things. But I think as we've gotten farther and farther away from the activity, like being participants in it and getting closer to being facilitators of it, that's changed in how we're viewing it.
Yeah, I think that's probably the place to start because when you're right up in it and you're participating, and yeah, I think you're right. I think the inclination is when you stop being a student and you move to the coaching side or the adult side, the initial impulse is still to participate in the activity.
Yeah,
and so
it's still about, you're still competing with the other coaches now or the other instructors. You're still competing with the other teams. When we go out, we still hear a lot about, from the adult side of like, we're still competing.
So it's a very personal type of thing. And I think you're right. The further away you get from that, the further you move into the space of like, let's not think about what my specific team that I'm working with right now is doing and more about like what's sustainable for the whole activity. It really comes back to, I think, a couple of things. One, what we talked about on our earlier podcast, which is that competitions take time. Competitions take students out of their homes or jobs or
in classrooms, depending on how far the meet is or how big the meet is.
With travel time and so on and so forth. So there has to be some kind of justification that makes that make sense. And then I think the other piece of the puzzle is it has to be an experience, or we want it to be an experience that teaches the competitors something. So in other words, when you go to a meet, and you put on your performance and you get graded and you go to that award ceremony, when you go home on Saturday night or Sunday morning, what did you gain from that experience that you would get nowhere else doing nothing else?
Right. So I think as we go into this, I think maybe you were already there because obviously you did marching band and drum corps and, you were in a performance activity, whereas, Cheeto, you did, I know before you moved to Texas and did junior RTC, you were doing crew and you were in a sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sport friendly.
I only did junior ROTC, so I don't have even other sports background or any performance background. So I think that this is maybe not a newer shift for you, but I think a newer shift for us.
Yeah, because between soccer, crew, and then especially the way that we came up in the JRTC activity, everything was about being the best sport, best competitor.
Well, we went to a really highly competitive program, one of the ones that's kind of defined the activity. So I think our lens was really narrow and specific. So I think as we go into this, is we want to talk about our goal as we move into the space in the coming years is to start to shift the mindset away from basically head-to-head sport, like we're trying to beat someone, we're trying to compete, we're trying to, it's all about basically kind of tearing others down, like it's about building yourself up over others.
Yeah, at the expense of other people.
Well, and obviously, we just the Quick Commutes podcast is about how to look at competition in a healthy way if you're a competitor, or how to teach competition in a healthy way if you're in the educational side of things. And that kind of does a deep dive on it, but that's generally the I think the premise, which is that we're essentially asking teams to do an artistic endeavor. It's no less artistic because it's regulation, to bring the words of a manual that just are on a page to life in this incredibly characteristic way at this super high level. Like, that's an artistic pursuit. And then there is no defense, right, in drill. You can't go out and you don't beat the other team because you were able to stop them from scoring more drills, while they were drilling. Like, that's not a thing. That's not a thing that we do. And so if it really is about performing and it really is about creating high-level, excellent athletic art, then the way that we talk about competitions and the way that we think about facilitating competitions or judging competitions, all of that has to kind of do a little bit of a shift around to make it make sense. And I think that for us, it very much is, if you are going to go to a competition, one, it better be worthy of everyone's time. Everyone that's a stakeholder in that day, it better be worthy of their time. And two, it better have some kind of educational bent. And if it does not, then we are essentially going into a situation where we're pretending like it's a competition, or we're pretending like it has meaning, and then really maybe it doesn't. Right?
So I think as we go into this, and one of the reasons why we're talking about this is as we have traveled and we've just now moved out of the major competition season for, the activity, and now we're in summer camps. I think one of the big things that we've seen and heard and talking to people basically all over the country is that the state of drill meets is relatively sad. I don't think I've heard of many people having very good experiences at almost any level at any place around the country.
Well, and we know this from the very, very, bottom level, which is we get contacted to do tabulation or do briefing or do scoring. And a lot of these times, especially with the great turnover during COVID, is like the people hosting the meets are only hosting the meets because they, at one point in their unit's history, started to host a meet. So, like, the people that aren't even, that started and wanted to host the drill meet are long, long, long gone.
Right, or we see the situation where it's like, okay, I'm new to the job, and my regional director said, you're hosting a meet, right? Or my area manager said, we need a qualifier, so you're
it. And it's like, okay, well, I'm trying to figure out all this stuff and try to host a quality meet. And so that's kind of where I think the genesis of this whole conversation comes from, which is, if you're in that position, or if you're in a judging position, or if you're a competitor, all these things are linked. In other words, there's no world in which you can just talk about meets from the hosting side or just from the judging side. We hear a lot of the times, oh, well, the judges are bad. The judges don't do a good job. And it's like, well, you can't talk about the judges not doing a good job without talking about the hosts. And you can't talk about the hosts without talking about the competitors who attend the meet. It's all linked together in this ecosystem.
So, as we go into this conversation, I think our goal what we would hope that people could take away and start to, if they started to apply this, our goal for the activity is that we would start to see drill meets be an educational opportunity, and that the drill meets are able to basically start to facilitate the mindset that it's not necessarily about, beating your competitor or, chasing people down. Again, where it's not necessarily trying to build yourself up to basically tear others down, but where the students are able to be rewarded for the effort they're putting forth, to be given feedback that actually helps them to grow, right? And to basically create an environment that allows people to grow through the activity by getting good feedback, by being in a good being in a good environment.
I also think it's just really important to note that it's not always just about we're winning at the expense of others, because competitive sports, that's the mindset, and it's not necessarily always just I'm winning because they're losers, but it's in terms of reformatting the viewpoint towards performance activities where even if you didn't win, it didn't make the time going worth nothing. It didn't waste your time to go, even if you didn't get the first place trophy, because the experience as a whole was actually worth it for you. You got to demonstrate your mastery of the subject and perform for people to appreciate what you put time and effort into. And that's where kind of the shift is really happening, is how do you make it a little bit more like the performance-based activities that are doing a great job educationally, keeping students involved without it being life or death that you have to win a competition, or what was the point of your season?
Well, and so coming from both worlds, because obviously I was a junior RTC kiddo, but I was also in music from the time that I was in grade school, and you kind of see the sharp contrast where it's like, well, if we go to this drill meet and we don't win, well, it wasn't an all kind of a waste of time, because isn't the point of this to win?
Correct.
And you go to the marching band contest and maybe you don't win, but you're talking about the competition after you're talking about the experience of getting to perform, or making that improvement from the time that you last went out there. You made these improvements as a group, and so I think that the performing arts world has done a really good job of contextualizing competition in a healthy way. We don't want to get in, and before we dive into this, let's be very clear. This is not some sort of feel good hippie, we don't believe in competition. Competition just has to be put in the right context. The competition, and we said this on the other podcast, the competition thing is great because it creates the situation in which you have to work urgently. It creates the accountability because it matters and it means something. When you go out there, there's going to be some kind of evaluation connected to your hard work, but it's not as though that's the end state. The end state is that you are performing, and the secondary thing that happens when you perform is that you are then graded and assigned a score and a placement and all that kind of stuff. So I really think that all we're talking about is doing what everyone else in the activity, or other like activities, doing what they're already doing. When a student goes off, to a contest, a music contest on the weekend, and a drill student goes off to a drill meet on a weekend, they should have equal experiences. And I think right now the conversation is, how do we bring the drill meet thing up to be more like what the other activities are doing? And that's kind of where this has to go, because if we're going to take a Saturday and the band is going to take a Saturday, that should be an equivalent experience. And right now, in many cases, it's just not, right?
Well, I also think, and I know we're about to get into it, and the introduction is maybe a little bit long, but I think it requires some groundwork, because I also think of what we've realized over the past season is that a drill is treated so subjectively in every single category.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I'm sure we'll go into this when it comes to the judging piece. It's as though, because in the absence of educational standards and backing, we've just decided, hey, it's whatever we think it is.
That's what I mean. It's every single, even the ones that have manuals. And maybe that's because sometimes when instructors come in, they don't have a drill background. And so, maybe it's uncomfortable to have to be able to enforce those things, or, the manuals change over time. What drill looks like today is not what it looked like 30 years ago. But drill, in general, every single aspect is treated so subjectively that right now I think most people have just given up. And again, we're going to talk about this more specifically. It's just based that it's a free-for-all at the moment of just okay, here's a score sheet. What you get is what you get. It's however good or bad those judges are. Have fun. And that's just not true, because every single event, including exhibition,
There is very little subjectivity in this activity. Very little
there
subjectivity.
are objective standards for difficulty, for basically the design aspect, for exhibition. All of the regulation events, color guard, inspection, and regulation have manuals, and they prescribe certain things that you're supposed to do during it.
And so let's hop into the host side, because it really, I think, we didn't know where to kind of start. Where do you start? Which one do you start? You got to start somewhere, because it all is a giant circle. But I think from the standpoint of hosting, for people out there listening, if your school hosts a meet, and if you're a cadet, these might be conversations that you have with your program. If you're an instructor, please take a couple minutes and let's talk through this, because the hosting thing is really kind of where a lot of this can be addressed, and where a lot of the issues that we see in the activity can be made better. So I think the subjectivity thing is a great lead into the host thing, because how many times do we go to drill meets or talk about to people that have attended drill meets, and the judge's briefing that's given is essentially just, hey, here's your score sheet, here's your drill floor. You know what drill is. Go out and we're going to start at this time, and some basic guidance about clerical and logistical items, and that's it. And then we send these cadets out in front, and then the judges are trying to figure out how to do their job. So I think when it comes to the hosting thing, the thing that we have to talk about, or the elephant in the room, is really about talking to the judges and preparing for a drill meet, and how do you put yourself in the right place to host a successful drill meet, right? And I think part of that comes from, there's a lot of reasons people host drill meets. Fundraising, because somebody told them to do it, because it's always been done and they feel the obligation to continue to do it. But the one reason that we don't see a whole lot of it is because we're trying to create an opportunity for the cadets in our area to have a successful weekend competition. And I think that for hosts, the first thing that every host could stand to do is to look and remember that, yes, it might be a great fundraiser, and yes, it might be a great, thing that you're doing for your area or your region. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is that when you host a meet, you are putting on an experience for other people's cadets. And starting from that place will make some of the things that we're going to suggest seem more relevant. Because I think a lot of times, like, well, that would just be a nice extra if we did this, and this. It would be a nice extra if we had a decent schedule. It would be a nice extra if the judges were well briefed. But most importantly, we have to conduct the meet. Like, we have to get it done. Schools have to come here, we have to conduct it, and then they have to go home. And that's like where it starts and ends. So I guess, can we speak to a little bit of what the responsibilities of hosting are, in light of the idea that, like, if you're hosting a meet, you have the responsibility of providing an experience to everyone who shows up there?
I think that's hard to talk about for a lot of instructors, because I think it is easy to view a drill meet as, let's just get it done, and a lot of those things are secondary. So how do you take what seems like a secondary focus and make it the primary, and make it worth your time in a world where no one's teaching you how to do those things? And I think, for me, my first thought on that is drill meet hosts need to talk more. If you're hosting a meet in your area, maybe, and I mean area as in like literally a space of where you exist, not like area in the Navy terms, but you have to know what the goal of that competition is for the students, right? And if it's educational, if it's a prep for a further meet, if you're in a space that's higher competitive, if this is the only thing that your area is ever going to do is a local meet, how do you make it worth their time? So educational, performative, a stepping stone. What is your drill meet? And I think you need to maybe look outside of just the individual meet first, because what is an SOP? What is an LOI? How do those things correlate to other ones? Because one of the most confusing things to me on a local level is you go to this drill meet over here, and it's going to ask you for this, this, and this done on this floor size with these rules. And then a month later, you're going to go to another local meet, and it's all different. How do you make that make sense for students?
Well, and yeah, I think that's the good starting point, because if you don't know what the point of your event is, whether it's a standalone isolated thing and you're using house cards with house rules, okay, great. That's fantastic. But you'd have to do that intentionally for it to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we see a lot of cases where meets are supposedly supposed to be preparation for higher level meets, whether it's, you know, at a regional level and it's working towards a state level, or even it's like a local level, school level, and it's working towards a district level.
Yep.
And yet there is no alignment between what is being asked at this particular meet and the meet that it purports to prepare you for. And it's like, can you imagine if you went and your football team was working through their regular season, but the rules of the football game were changing every Friday night. But the whole goal was to put your team in playoffs. You're trying to get to the 5A playoffs. And at the 5A playoffs, they're going to use real, no kidding, high school football rules. And yet we've decided that, you know, at this particular game, you know, the rules are going to be different this way, and we're going to use a different field size at this particular game. And there's no conversation happening between any of the hosts and the state sanctioning organization. That would be literal insanity.
That would be so stressful.
That would be so stressful, and it would be so stupid that no one would do it. And yet here we are.
And that's kind of the standard right now.
That's just normal, because no one. I think you're right. Sometimes we're having those conversations, and some areas are stronger, and some services are stronger in that. You know, not to make it sound like it's all doom and gloom, but like, I think the Marine Corps has done a fantastic job in saying that if you're going to host a regional drill meet in your region, we'll only support you and sanction and fund it if you use the stuff that we say is going to be the national level stuff. But that's only one example, one small example in a field of a lot of people holding meets in isolation and then not having those larger conversations about what's the point.
So step one, then, what we would say is get with the people in your area. Maybe it's the people in your service. You know, maybe it's just we have a bunch of programs all in one city. Maybe get with the people in your city or your state.
Well, and when you get with them, have the conversation of like, how is this all connected, or is it even connected? And
because it doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to be connected. But here's what I will say, and this is one of those things that's like, well, you DTD people are kind of crazy.
We are.
If you could unify anything, if it was supposed to be connected, if you could unify anything, unify the size of the drill areas and the entry and exits.
Oh,
honestly,
yes.
Having a drill card that is universal between drill meets is a nice thing, but it's not necessary.
Okay, a universal card on a 100 by 100 versus like an 80 by 60 is not a universal card, because the counts are so vastly different, and what you have and your approach to the like step size, you have to do so much internal changing. That is basically not.
I would rather have, and I don't know if you guys would agree or disagree, as from a teaching or an educational or coaching perspective, I would rather have uniform entry and exit points at every meet that I go to and run a different card every weekend.
Well, uniform entry exit in conjunction with uniform head judge in that regard.
Correct.
Because those things have to pair together.
Similar floor layouts.
Yeah.
Because it's like the nice thing to say we're all using the same commands, but then, you know, in hosts, might be a conversation. We talked about this 2 weeks ago when we were teaching out in Houston. And an instructor brought it up. He goes, everyone is on the same drill cards, and everywhere you go, people are like, well, you have to use the same drill card. And he said, I really missed the days, because it was a conversation started with my cadet commanders of like, how do we, this is our drill card for this meet coming up. How are we going to tackle this? Let's problem solve it and practice together. Let's work together to fit it on the floor that they want. And it's like, can you imagine if your choir students that are also in junior RTC, if for 4 years they sang the same song for 4 years every time they went to choir class and every concert and performance they gave, that would be so vapidly uneducational that it's laughable. And we were laughing about that. So if you're going to have the conversation, let's standardize the field of play like football, like baseball, you know, and maybe worry less about whether you're standardizing the drill sequence, because students are smart and they will figure out how to make new drills, and it will challenge them in very educational and positive ways to work together. But have the conversation of like, can we at least agree that this is going to be our schematic for what we're, you know, exhibition. This is going to be how we treat head judge locations and entry and exits.
Here are the rules. We're all going to have the same equipment requirements.
Things that make sense. Yes.
And on top of that, and we're not there yet, but for hosts, you also have to think about the fact that you are going to be bringing in judges that don't necessarily do this all the time. How much easier is it for your judges that do come in? Maybe they are lucky and you get to have them judge a couple different meets locally.
We've seen that a lot.
Now there's one floor. They know how to handle the entry exit for the cadet commanders. They know how to handle those exchanges because that's complicated.
Yeah, standardize
huge.
the comp procedure that a judge will go through. So, and especially if you are in, and we see this all the time. We're out in Las Vegas. It's like, how many of you have judged before? And 3/4 of the room, recruiters and reservists and National Guard type folks, 3/4 of the room are former art,
Absolutely.
college art. 3/4 of the room raises their hand. Well, make sure that when they judge on Saturday at Acme High School, that when they go the next Saturday down the road to the other one, that the process for them is very comparable or streamlined. That would be so much more meaningful to the student outcome than having a universal drill card that we all just agree we're going to do nothing but these commands and it's going to be that way until we vote it to be different.
And again, there's nothing wrong with using whatever card is for your service nationals if you are a meet that leads up into it. We're not saying you don't have to do that.
No, but that's a situation where it makes sense. And we've seen a lot of drill meets that purport to be prep meets for their service and then don't use the rules for their service or don't use the same formulas. Can you imagine having a qualifier for a service level nationals and not applying the same formula in how you come up with the overall scores? That would very much be like, again,
I think there is a sports equivalent.
there's
to
not a sports. I'm trying to come up with a metaphor. It's like this weekend when you go, it's about how many times you can throw the ball into the opposing fans' sideline, and that's how you get your points. But when you go and play in the playoffs, it's about getting across the, getting the ball to the end zone. Like, it doesn't make sense. It just, you have to have and as a host, that's part of the responsibility that you bear because you are creating the situation for everyone coming in, and that's just the tip of the iceberg on that.
Well, and I think that's why it's important that if you're a brand new host and you're worried about where do you start, the conversation is start by not being by yourself. You're not alone in this. No one is alone. And yet I feel like a lot of drill exists in these little bubbles. And you think about any sport or performance activity, those people don't just exist by themselves thinking they know what to do. If you're a brand new coach or you're a brand new marching band fill in the blank with a technical term that I don't know, but Matt would know, all of those things are going to talk to people to figure that out.
Again, you listen to professionals in other spaces talk, and they talk about how they talk to each other, and they figure out what works, and they figure out the best practices, and hey, what did you do here? It works so well. I want to replicate that for my students or the people that come in for this contest when I host it. Is like, have those conversations. And I think the theme of the hosting thing is have conversations, because the next piece of the puzzle, I think, with the hosting is how you need to be talking to the people you bring in to judge.
Yes.
At a base level, that means something as simple as if you put in a request for judges into the local recruiting station or the military base in your area, you got to follow up on it. You got to follow up and make sure that you know what your staffing is. And the number of meets where, even meets that we service or that we help, and we don't know how many judges we're going to get until
Literally
the briefing has started. Like, we're 5 minutes into the judge's brief, and now we figured out how many we have and who we can put on what floor. Starting by having the conversation of finding the judges, period, and then following up and stressing to them the importance of the job that you're asking them to do. And we've seen amazing examples of this by instructors who are really student-centered and really do a good job. And we've seen examples where I think people just get overwhelmed and they forget to follow up on that because they're also worried about the catering, and they're also worried about the space and reserving the right spots with their administration, and it just falls through the cracks. So yeah, I think the communication thing goes all directions from the host side.
Well, and I do think it's important when you're trying to find judges, because I think back to the few instructors we've seen do a really, really good job. Phenomenal job of getting judges, getting committed judges, involved judges, because that, of course, is the next step. And in every correspondence I've seen from those instructors as they've asked for judges, they all highlight to them, this is an educational thing. This is highlighting the work and the effort the students have put into it. So I think it's about keeping that in mind as a host. Is the way that you frame it in your request is also really important and can kind of help you get judges. And those judges then come with the right mindset of, I'm coming here to assist an educational demonstrative product from these students, not constantly penalizing them for not doing it my way. And that starts a conversation of the judge's brief and how do you even, have one?
Yeah, I'm not gonna say his name on here, but my routinely when we work with this individual, my inbox blows up with constant reminders of like, hey, please RSVP if you can be there. Remember, this is so important to the students. Blah 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 blah. It's like I'm not even most of the times I'm not even physically going to be there, but I'm still on the traffic, which tells me that there's some forethought into the communication process, right? Which does take us straight into the judge's briefing thing.
Well, and I think going into the judge's brief, I think that there needs to be a shift in how judges are being talked about and considered, because I think a lot of times when we go places and talk to people who host drill meets, people think that judges are dumb.
And they're not.
The
They
language
think they're incapable. They think they're unable.
It's very much well, they can only remember one thing, or they can only think about one thing at a time, and it's like, these are people, and they're professionals in their career fields, all of whom had to go through rigorous training and remember and do a good job to be retained and promotable.
And I think post-COVID, at least, I don't know, everything's kind of a blur pre-COVID, but post-COVID, we have, in doing now multiple meets, we have had almost no problems with judges, with being able to give a specific brief with not a huge amount of knowledge, but certain specific points that we want them to look at, and them doing what we ask them to do.
Like, if you look at, and this is again, everything is educational. If you think the people in front of you are stupid, then they're probably going to act like what you think of them.
Well, and because they're not stupid, if you think they're stupid, they're going to realize that, and then they may act stupid on purpose. Like, they may purposely go out of their way to do other things because that's how people work.
So I think, the start of the premise is, first of all, when you bring judges in, whoever they are, you have to start from the premise that they're going to do, that you believe, genuinely believe, authentically believe that they will do a good job. That they will understand the intent of the day, and that they will do the best that they possibly can in good faith to provide an experience for the students.
And we have found that when you do that,
They do.
they will. That makes them feel good. If you come in saying, "Hey, we're really excited to have you here. You guys are gonna, provide this awesome experience. We're looking for this, this, and this from you, and we definitely know you can provide it." As you see them sit up a little bit straighter and really start to pay attention and listen closely to what you're saying.
When you frame this right, this goes into the judge's briefing thing. Is like, first of all, you have to have a judge's brief.
You cannot have a judge's brief.
You can't, and yet, how many times the judge's brief? Thanks for being here. There's coffee and donuts in the lounge.
It's not just logistics.
Your drill area is over here. Lunch is going to be brought to you at this time. Look at your score sheet. Do the best you can. Grade what you know.
Well, and that's well. I say you cannot just tell them grade what they know, because as we've talked, I don't know, have we talked about this in other podcasts, like what drill is and how it's different from?
Yes. Go watch. Go watch. Go listen to the whole what is drill.
Okay, so we did do that.
Yeah,
So we did exactly that.
Okay, I just wanted to. What we are asking junior ROTC students to do has moved so far beyond the scope of the purpose of drill in the military that you cannot just ask them to grade what they know, because
Looks nothing like this.
No.
when the students are achieving at such a high level, because some of them do this pretty much professionally or semi-professionally, they do this enough to be working a full-time job or even a part-time job, whereas most people in the military, after they get out of basic, they don't do drill again unless they go into a specific, drill instructor, MTI,
in which case it's a completely different context anyway, right?
Which you should know about your judges is who you're getting, because those are two different conversations based on that.
Well, and depending on if we're getting training people that have a training background in the military,
that's even more important to brief them.
Yeah, that brief looks completely different than if we're getting
what you know.
And that looks like something totally different. So it's like, first of all, have a judge's brief. Second of all, know who you're bringing in, and know that whatever their background is, we're essentially asking people to come umpire the baseball game, having once taken gym class, right?
And I would say there's just a few key things, personally, that I know of talking to different judges, that if I had to say have a judge's brief, there are just a few things you might want to just make sure you mention to your judges. 1, these are other people's children. 2, if you're going to be here, please be here the entire time, swapping out judges in the middle of the day, tag teaming of like, hey, I'm going to judge the first 2 schools, you're going to judge the other 2 schools. Those things don't work. And then also, please don't leave in the middle of a performance. If you only say those 3 things, you will change the entire course of your day for those judges in terms of what feedback they provide the kids.
Well, and the whole struggle with briefing the judges, I think, is that when hosts are not duty experts about drill team, and when they are duty experts about drill team, you run into the exact same problem. Either you're intimidated by the amount of information you believe you need to give them to do a good job, or you're not intimidated because this is what you do, and you overload them with specific information to the point where they're not quite sure.
To the point where you might as well have not given them.
And overloaded them to the point that you might as well have not given them a judge's brief. And we've seen both extremes. I think we've experienced both extremes from professionally, but also, on the competition side, and both of them are equally as damaging. It is very difficult to find the right line of how much information to give a judge to do a good job. But I think that the thing for the host is you need to err on the side of giving them the big picture items and then several key educational points. This is probably something you should publish in your SOPs or publish out to your area.
And this is also why you should communicate with the people in your area.
Because you need to know what those points are.
If you are a qualifier meet or a meet that's part of, funneling people up into a higher level of competition for your service, you should be talking to whoever, the people running your nationals,
your drill committee, your whatever advisor,
your RD, your area manager, whoever that is you should be then running up and saying, hey, what are important things?
What will our students be tested on at the end state? Therefore, how can we scaffold that into what we're doing at our meet?
What are we hoping to see the students, like, what are we hoping they are outputting? Like, what's the goal that you want to see from the students when they go to compete? Like, what are you hoping to see? What's the goal?
And, you can also, and talking in, let's say that you're not a funnel up towards a service event or a city event even. If you are in isolation, you can still talk to everyone in your general area and say, listen, what are we, you're stressing this, and this. Okay, you're covering down on that, and most schools are going to your meet. I'm going to cover down on this, and this. And we can spread the load of what you need to brief the judges to look for, because it's not as though we're trying to hit every possible thing. I think one of the fallacies is like, especially when we're briefing reg or color guard, is the judges need to know every nitnoity small facet, when in reality, it comes down, the things that will make or break a placement for a student or a score for a student are much bigger picture things.
Well, at least for now they are.
Sure. Right. And if there are things that you talk to everyone in your area and like, well, we hate when we see blank.
When the teams in color guard, they march shoulder to shoulder because they think it looks so sharp, but we know the manuals say the march at close interval. Okay, you found your yellow car, right? You found that thing that if you pointed it out, every judge will be able to see.
And then here's what will happen. Because, again, not everything is about moving out of your area. It may just be, people are happy to compete within your area. Everywhere we go, people are looking at the judges' feedback. Oh, we get this comment. We're going to change what we're doing.
Yep.
If you guys as an area decide we want to see drill team look like this or express itself like this, if you guys agree to then brief the judges like this year, this season.
These are going to be our 3 major points that our points of emphasis for this site.
And then what will happen is the teams will take the feedback because
they're already taking the feedback.
Because the students want to apply the feedback they get from quote-unquote professionals, people who are in the military, people they may look up to. Over the season, that's going to go away. And then what happens is, in the next season, you don't have to brief that anymore because teams aren't doing it.
No, there's no reason to brief, you shouldn't stomp every left foot, because last season, every meet that the school went to when they stomped their left foot to stay in step, they received a comment on it and a rating accordingly, and they learned, hey, that's not something we're going to do anymore, and they made the adjustment. So, you can look at your area, have those conversations, because we do a lot of drill meet briefing, and we do a lot of judge prepping, and I think people expect this regulation brief that lasts all afternoon about the minutia of, in the Marine Corps order, it says this, but in the previous iteration of the Marine Corps order, it said that nobody cares.
Right now, it's very simple. Right now, it's very simple. Full steps out of the pivots. Don't stomp your feet during the half steps. Don't slam your rifles on the ground during order.
and you will get your ranking and rating from there. And so I think that going back to the original point of like, if you're intimidated by how much information, please don't be. And we're always a resource. We're a phone call or an email away. We have free resources on Drillpedia that will help you know what to focus on, or help get you framed the right way to go in and brief a set of jobs.
We're nerds. We love this. If you don't have the funds to like bring us out to help support, we will still have a conversation
I would
with you.
be happy to have a conversation about how to conduct a successful judges brief, because at the end of the day, you don't need to be intimidated. It's not actually that much information.
No.
On the flip side, if you're a drill expert and you're listening to this because you like drill, you're going to have to think about, how do I cut this back to the most important information? I think there's a very big impulse in the activity right now to overbrief judges, and I think that the end result for the student, and again, it feels good to be the expert, it feels good to have all the answers, but if you're student centric, the end result for the student is a judge who is basically as effective as one who was not briefed at all. Right along with that, hosts, you have to make sure that you tell your judges what their job is.
Mm-hmm.
Their job is to rank the performances in order of merit. In other words, you have to find first place and you have to find last place. And what you might, as a host, you might only care that the ones who get trophies are right. First through third place got to be right. First through fifth got to be right. But you know what? The student in 9th place cares why they're not in 8th place.
Well, okay. Well, in briefing your judges too, is you need to know what your scoring system is doing. Right? If you're using proportional scoring, you need to tell your judges, hey, you may want to come in and be really hard on the students. But the harsher you grade them, the more the point gaps are going to increase or decrease.
And really where you should feel intimidated, hosts, where you should is the scoring department. And again, we would love to have those conversations, but you know how many times the brief is like, well, start in the middle and go up or down so that you can leave room. And you're like, okay, well, if you start in the middle and you start further down the sheet, how many meets have we been to where the meet was decided? I mean, literally within the week, where the meet was decided because we didn't have a conversation about, you can't just give low numbers. Your judge, this will get to the judging piece. Judges must talk. And hosts, you must know to tell your judges to talk about where you're triangulating the scores, because you don't want the student experience of I placed or I didn't place, or I'm in 9th and not 8th. You don't want that to be, you want that to be because of the merit of the students, not because of a mathematical issue that could have been briefed and avoided.
And when we talk about judges talking about their scores, we're not saying copy. We don't need the same scores, but what you can't do.
And hosts, this is something that we tell judges. If you have something that's being done and one judge, let's just use a 30-point scale. If one judge thinks it's 25 out of 30, it is not okay for another judge to think it's 9 out of 30. Because just objectively, one of those things is not going to be right.
Right, because again, most drill is not subjective.
And people say it's like, oh, well, grade what you see, grade what you know, and use your numbers. It's like, but you don't realize the numbers are interconnected, and the numbers affect the student experience on the backside. So like, when you have conversations about judges with the judges,
they need to be talking about, was that right or wrong? Did we think that was, was that pretty good? Was that kind of in the middle of the pack? And, we think maybe we're going to see something better. Like, they need to be having a conversation about,
So if one judge thinks it's a 25 and one judge thinks it's a 23,
or even a 20,
or even a 20 or a 19, but it's when you go, and if you're a coach, you've gone to meets, you've seen 4 score sheets, and one of the score sheets is like, oh, well, that must have been the low score. But you know what? If you stop and do the math, you might as well have not employed the other 3 judges, because the low scorer did call the meet, and without the hosts having that, and this is where you should be a little bit intimidated.
And not necessarily the low score, basically the outlier
score. If that the mechanics of judging are what you should cover primarily in the judge's brief. Rank for, your job is to rank. The way that you do that is to rate the teams using your score sheets and giving them numbers. Your numbers have to loosely correlate to the level of performance, and we have to be aware that we are trying to avoid, we're trying to come to a not an agreement, but we're trying to come to a consensus about where we're, and if you had that conversation with your judges, you would instantly see the output of your meet and the meaningfulness of your meet change, right? Like, we're here to have those conversations because a lot of them are very in-depth and a lot of them are not immediately apparent without looking through a lot of numbers and coming to these conclusions. I think and again, maybe because we're idiots or giant geeks. I don't know. I think I've never heard anyone else have the conversation of like, judges, you need to be talking to each other because you can't have disparate score sheets that are so far apart.
Again, we don't want you to have the same numbers. If you have a higher standard and you want to keep your scores down a little bit, that's fine.
But there needs to be a range that is consistent, or hosts, or you need to look at this and go, maybe we should be averaging our scores or doing something differently with our mathematics.
Or a thing that you can do, and again, if you want to talk, we can talk to you about this. Maybe for, your local meets or your meets funneling up, maybe you use a different score sheet. Right? Maybe you don't need to use a score sheet that's got 800 different numbers on it where it's hard for the judge, where, it requires the judge to see every single command, and if the students run through it, they're just guessing. Right?
God, we're gonna go down this rabbit hole. All right, let's do it.
Go. We can overview.
So here's well, I didn't know we were gonna talk. So here's the thing. You have to remember that when sheets trickle down from the service level or from the national level, every national level meet, service or otherwise, is, and if you're an instructor listening to this, we'll talk teacher terms. Every one of those things is a summative assessment. There is nothing after it. The point is that it ends there. It's a test of your knowledge. The end. It's a summative assessment. But every meet that funnels into it is a formative assessment. And go to your principals and say, hey, I'm going to use the exact same thing on the final exam as my bell ringer when I start class. And they will look at you and go, what are you doing? Why are you at my school? Why did I hire you? That doesn't make any sense at all. When you're when you're in a system, hosts don't necessarily feel compelled to use the exact same rubric if you are trying to get a better result to help educate the schools as they move past your event, right? So like when we talk about have the conversation and try to be in a pipeline, it is completely reasonable to have a different rubric that helps you at the stage of the game that you're in that differs.
I was saying, because especially when you get to your higher level competitions, those briefs are usually days before, multiple hours, for long sessions.
They're certainly not 45 minutes at 05:30, trying to get it done before you have to run out.
So it might make more sense for you to go to a simpler score sheet or one that has a different goal that's easier to brief in a shorter amount of time, that's more understandable or that's more user friendly for your judges.
And again, all this happens at the host level, right? This doesn't happen at the judge level. This doesn't happen at the competitor level. To host a drill meet is a very heavy responsibility. And I think that maybe as an activity we've gotten away from the conversation of like, let's not just host to host. Because as we've just illustrated, the rabbit hole goes deep. And
we didn't even touch on make sure you're actually setting a schedule that maybe you're not just doing 10 minutes prior to the first event. You're doing your judge's brief, allow 45 minutes, have a lunch, schedules, time hacks, all those things are not even touched on.
We can do we'll probably at some point do like a whole separate podcast on each of these things separately. This is kind of just an overview to maybe get you thinking that like, let's make drill meets an educational experience at all levels of hosting, judging, or being a competitor yourself. There are things we can be doing to have a conversation to make this a better experience for the students. So there's way more in depth, right? You can always find a way to talk to us, and we will also probably just do a podcast on each of these 3 topics individually at some point as well.
So hosts, no pressure, but all the pressure, because when you bring a bunch of people and you take their entire Saturday and you say, we're going to host a drill meet, let's talk, because a lot of this stuff is beyond the scope of what's reasonable for a public school teacher to be doing. Let's talk. It costs nothing to have a conversation. It costs nothing to get some outside perspective and guidance, because your job is just so important. So,
I think that's going to be the bulk of I don't think the other parts are going to be quite as long, because none of the other parts have as many responsibilities as hosting an actual drill meet.
Well, also we kind of talked a little bit about the mindset of judging, and is why the second step is judging, because it was like, okay, hosts, here's some of the things you have to think about, but within that is how do you talk to your judges? Okay, well, if you're a judge, how should you be expecting to be talked to? It's important to kind of hear what the host should be asking of you and what you should be asking from your judges, so that the next step is the natural progression of, okay, judging. What does that look like? Why is that important? How does it matter? How do you affect it?
If drill is an educational vehicle to teach students to excel and gain confidence through performance, right, then judges are not referees, calling penalties, and if this is a performing arts activity, and I don't think there's any reasonable argument that it's not, if that is true, your job, and this is judges, man, your job is an educational job, right? And so when you say that judging is educational, then we have a little bit different of a conversation about like what do we do as judges. At least we know there's so many people that give back by judging.
But I think this is important now because I think that it didn't used to be this way like 10 years ago, right? I think now we see that there are lots of civilians, right, who are wanting to give back to the activity, but who maybe necessarily can't coach. Right, we are seeing people starting to get out of the military and go back to like their hometowns, and again, they don't really want to coach drill team, but they want to give back to the activity.
We're also seeing a lot of people who are products of junior ROTC in the military coming back to judge.
We've also seen, because of the way that like the services are doing their meets, is we've also seen now, I think, a larger scale of like instructors
judging. So let's just start from the premise that judging is an educational act. If a student is bad at math and they're struggling with math, and the reason that they are in their math tutoring with you, the educator, is to improve their math skills, and the only language that you use to describe their mathematical ability is negative language, it's punitive language, and I understand we're in a military context. Everything about evaluation and assessment is generally in a basic training or a punitive kind of sense. But if we flip that, it's an educational activity. If everything that you said to that student was punitive in nature and all the language that you used was negative, would that student be more or less likely to excel as a result? And would
they even want to try?
Would they even want to continue to do math? And I can tell you, as somebody that had a really negative experience, the answer is no, right? So when it comes to judging, I think the number one thing that I see being a challenge out in the space is just framing it from the idea that because of how our activity is scored and because of the score sheets that we generally use and the way that our meets are set up, that the judging is really about educating the student. And if it's about educating the student, then this is a build-up process. In other words, every performer, every team, every group starts at 0. They start with a 0. And as they perform, they earn points going up. And we talked to judges about this. They have to earn points to go up. There is not a scenario where you start at a perfect score and your demerits or your failures cause you to take points away. And starting from the premise that we're in a build-up system as a judge, then lends to the idea of like, here's how we use our sheets better, here's how we award points. It cascades down into all these other outcomes.
I would say that that's actually something that's really important for the judges is we're talking about the ideal way that you should approach that, right? But some of the scoring that exists or some systems you may have to work within might be slightly different. I, as a judge, the first thing I want to know is what are the score sheets and how am I expected to grade? Because maybe I am being asked to use a demerit-based system. Maybe I'm asked to use a score sheet I've never seen before. I think the first step a judge should be taking is educating yourself on what is being asked of you in the scenario you're going into.
Which means if the host doesn't tell you these things in their brief, then you should not be afraid to ask the question about, hey, how am I supposed to be using this, or what am I supposed to be using?
I was going to say, I think actually before any of that, the first thing for judges need to do is get yourself in the right headspace, because I think as we've seen more and more, I think this is the most people who have actually been involved in, like, who are involved in the activity actively judging that we have seen probably ever.
So many.
Yeah,
with instructors judging, with coaches judging, with civilians, with I think this is the biggest, the largest pool of people who actually have knowledge about the activity judging that we've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so I think in talking to people, I think one of the biggest things we've seen is I think people are really excited to judge.
They are.
And it starts to become a little bit about, well, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to make sure everyone knows this, or I'm going to do these things, or I'm going to achieve this goal, or, maybe even on the less positive side is, oh, I've got the clipboard. I'm the one who gets to,
It's my turn now.
I'm going to make sure everyone knows that this is how it's going to,
I'm going to make sure it's not like my time.
I think first and foremost.
But can you imagine the math teacher walking in and going, it's all about me. I am here because this is the me show now. It's Mr. Math Teacher show. That would be insane.
Well, we know teachers that exist like that, and
they're not the good ones.
Know them for not good reasons.
Well, and so I think you're right. I think it is like the frame of mind that you come in with.
So I think it's making sure that, like hosts need to frame it as, I think judges, it's your responsibility. Like we talked as hosts, you need to talk to your area and find out what the goal is and what the purpose is. As judges, you need to go into it as part of your responsibility if you're someone who's involved in the activity and you have knowledge of the activity.
Especially if you're an instructor, especially if you're a civilian
Especially
coach,
if you're an educator.
especially if you are in the classroom at any point, in any capacity.
You need to talk to the host and first and foremost say, what do you want? What is the goal? What are you hoping to see from me? What are we hoping for the students to get out of this experience? You need to put aside whatever your personal things are. We all have personal things. Whatever is really important to you is you need to put that aside for a moment, and you need to first and foremost find out what the goal of the host is.
Well, and then you approach that from the standpoint of being a teacher who happens to be teaching through a pencil and a clipboard, right?
And then you go as, okay, well, what scoring system are we using? What is, can I see the SOP, the LOI? Can I see what the rules are?
This is the crazy thing. I just remember back to talking to, we were called in at the 11th hour to support a dire grading emergency, basically. And they had college ROTC cadets. And, back to the thing about, like, your judges aren't stupid. They, they wanted to know what the SOP was. They wanted to see excerpts from the drill manual. They wanted to do a good job, and they asked questions, and then thankfully we were able to provide some of that to them. And then they did a fantastic job.
They did a wonderful job.
We see that on the college level, the fresh graduates going into that, all the way up to literally a recent time when I had to be briefing judges that were actual active duty on an active base doing their full-time active job. And they were like, can I get some homework to make sure that I can review the information that we want to present forward as judges?
And those are people on a forward operating base. Like they're not we're talking about people that are
do not have extra time.
No, not an active duty role like you'd see stateside here.
No.
And
that's just because people genuinely, I think, do, like Pancho mentioned, is the excitement to kind of keep going, to pass down to the students in the activity is very, very real right now, and present in every conversation we have with people that want to judge, active duty judge, fresh graduate judge. All of those things are coming together, and we're seeing the results. So you can give that to them. You can ask that of them, and judges should be asking for it. And
you should. And I know, and the reason why we say you should is because a lot of times when we talk to people, well, they're just not gonna know.
They don't have time for it. They're not interested. They're not gonna figure it out, right? Like, if you start from the premise that the judge isn't going to do something, you might be missing the opportunity. And again, if you are judging, you should be asking those questions and craving that information so that you can do the best job you can. And I don't know if it's because I don't know, our experience with talking to judges has been literally wonderful, and I'm thinking of all these examples and I can't think of that. And I'm just wondering if it's not because of that unconditionally positive view of what they're going to do, and making sure that they can have those conversations and arming them to do the best job possible and framing their brain right from a scoring standpoint. Like, maybe we're just seeing the result of what we think they are. And if more people thought the judges were great and that they would do a good job, then they would.
Well, and I think likewise, then if people didn't just assume that the host is not going to care or they're not going to know, and maybe they don't. Maybe they don't to start with.
But your question could get them to the point where they can figure it out.
But maybe they haven't been asked yet to think about it, and in you asking them, they may flounder the moment or be flustered. Say, "Well, I don't know. You just do whatever."
That's great.
By the way, don't just do whatever. That is not a permission to just go and then do whatever. That is then your responsibility to say, "Oh, they're not sure," and then you need to then guide them,
or especially if you're experienced.
And if you're a junior RTC instructor, if you're in a judging capacity, right, it is triply or quadruply your responsibility to go and ask, because the number of stories that we've heard of people encountering judges who have just used that opportunity to like enact their own agenda. Well, they didn't like my routine. You know, there's coach at a rival school. They don't like our routine. So then I'm going to use this as an opportunity to grade that routine down. Or people that like, well, this school does really well, and so I'm going to make sure that these horror stories and they're only being talked about because it's really happening. Is like, if you're a junior RTC instructor, so much more is your responsibility to go and have the discussion of how do you want to see this, and not accepting, well, do whatever you want. Well, would you prefer to see me evaluate colors reverse this way or this way? I know that it could be, you know, I could look at the scoring category as being this or this. Which would you prefer? Like, if you are an instructor now, if you're a person that just happens to, or if you are either an instructor or you are a coach or civilian that's still involved in the activity, so much, you know, of this is on you. And if you are someone that's just, you know, maybe you're in the active duty military and you're grading and you happen to cross this, is like, you can still ask those questions when you're unsure. And you should continue to ask questions when you're unsure until you're not unsure anymore. Because when you step in front of the student as a teacher in that capacity, you definitely want to be prepared. You wouldn't want to step out in front of any other work environment unprepared.
And host, by the way, just going back to you for a second, if you realize, let's say you get into judging and you realize there's somebody who's got a bias or a clear agenda, don't be afraid to say something to them.
Say thank you for your time if they're not willing.
Say,
to
don't be
decide.
afraid to just maybe remove that person and just you drop all of those scores from that particular person. But basically, don't be afraid to say something or steer. A lot of times, oh, but the judging has already started, so it is going to be what it is. No.
It does not have to be. And it's as simple as letting the competitors know, having that level of transparency, which we didn't even touch on, because that's part of the in-depth part.
Yeah.
But having that transparency is also okay, of like, hey, to all my competitors, scores came out, but we realized there had been an inherent bias behind this judge, so scores dropped. I know it seems crazy to kind of do something like that, but it's appreciated by the people it's actually affecting, because you don't know what kind of comments those kids are now taking to heart and modifying every bit of how they were approaching something. And it's now going to cost them future experiences because they went off of one bit of knowledge that might have been guided from the wrong space.
Well, and I know that we're going to go into this. I mean, obviously, and within the coaches network, we're even having the conversation for the people that want to judge. Because, again, it is such an easy way to give back because it's such a low time commitment.
But it's also such an easy way to skew the event or to skew the experience.
Well, and that's why the conversation is so important, because at the end of the day, like, if you are a judge and you go into it with the right frame of mind and you go in asking questions and you go in, you know, with an earnest heart of I want to do the best job for these students because these students have done the best job theoretically that they can do for me, right?
And it's not about what you like.
And it's not about my biases. It's not about what I think it should be or whatever, but it's about what the host sees the greater vision as being and what we're working towards, again, education. Then I think a lot of the things that we would normally tell judges or that we run into kind of just disappear in the wash.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of practical things that we could talk about. We could talk about, like, I don't know, let's not write down our opinions about exhibition routines.
Again, we can do a separate
let's not pull cadets aside in the debrief and say, wow, that was the best thing I've seen all day. Because if everything was the best thing you've seen all day, for you see 12 schools. For this one school, they see one you, right? And it leads to a very confusing. So there's like lots of tangible, practical things. But I think if you start from the frame of mind that it is educational, and you start from the frame of mind that to do the best job you possibly can, you need to ask questions and seek the tools that you feel like you need, then I think that a lot of this is just doing those things would create a better outcome for the students.
Absolutely.
If you could get outside of, this is speaking to all of our expert friends, you know, instructors, etc. out there. If you could get outside of, I'm here and it's now about me, judges should disappear. If I think there's a big tendency in our activity, especially if you can kind of know what you're doing, to put yourself out there and to become a persona in your area or in a drill meet circuit.
Or for the host to highlight, oh, we have, you know, so-and-so, and they did all these things, and da-da-da.
And it's like, the most educational thing that a judge should do is fade into the background and allow the students to shine, and remember that your job is to give them a good faith ranking and rating experience. Go back to those two words: rank first, rate second. get them in the right order using your scorecard, you should fade into the background. And it should not be that the students it should not be that the performers are the judges, I think, right? It's got to be that the students are always the performers.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then we've seen this, you know, manifest in a bunch of ways. For active duty judges, sometimes it's you just got a badge and you're really excited, and now you're in a position where you feel like there's a bunch of young recruits all around, and so you're going to be the big bad guy, you know, on the drill pad. And we've had to have those conversations with judges like, hey, remember, this is about them, not about you.
Or they don't even have a badge and they're just young, you know, young in their career, and they want to emulate those people that they see.
We've got to have those conversations. Sometimes it's dealing with individuals who are alumni from schools, and they're not so far removed that they haven't figured out that it's about the students, because they still themselves likely identify and feel like a student. You know, we've had those conversations. So it really, from the judging standpoint, is like, it's all about going into it with the right frame of mind. If you don't go into it with the right frame of mind, you're going to talk about how when I get to this meet, I'm going to hit people for, you know, the thing that irks me so much in the judging conversation is when people start to talk about judges, they're like, I'm going to hit them for this. I'm going to hit them for that. I'm going to like it's all punitive language. And it's like, no, they're just not going to earn as much credit if they don't demonstrate the skill, you know, in the characteristic correct way. That language flip for a judge, going back to kind of how we started this conversation, that language flip changes how you see what this activity is. I'm going to hit them for doing it wrong. No, I'm going to award less credit to teams that fail to demonstrate, you know, what that skill is supposed to be. If you don't go in with that mindset, the educational outcome to the student at the end of the day is going to be inherently less effective in bringing them up. And again, what's the point of going to a drill meet? It's to learn how to perform at a better level than you did going in.
Well, and then going back to the educational piece is, you know, after the mindset is then people who are experts, people who are instructors or coaches, or, you know, people who are educating in this space. You should then go, like, one of the things that you can provide as an expert judge is the depth of knowledge, right? So
Actual feedback.
Well, so if we're, like, when we talked, you know, about hosts needing to let the judges know they can collaborate, is your job then is when you, let's say you're doing your regulation or color guard, is when you get together, is you can then, the judges don't have to know everything, right? They don't need to know the manuals. If it's an all-service meet, the Air Force person doesn't need to know what the Marine Corps, you know, is doing. You, as an expert, can, you know, come and say, okay, here are things that, yes, this was right. You know, this was not for the manual.
You know, I'm an instructor, so I brought my TC with me. Let's go and open up the book real quick before this next team come in and make sure we're all reading the same thing and we're doing this the right way. Like, you're right, that element of collaboration together, not in a, I'm going to copy scores because
not in, let me look at your scores, oh, that number's not right, you need to go higher or lower, but in being able to provide the context of, you know, let me help you think about maybe where we should be. You know, that team was, yeah, that was pretty good. If you felt like they were good, because I've seen hundreds of teams and I've been doing this for many years, I can tell you, I'm not going to tell you they're the best or the worst or that you should give them the top score, but I can say, yeah, if you thought that team was great, yeah, but if they're like, oh my God, that was amazing, and you're like, you know, maybe let's hold our scores. Let's leave room at the top, because, you know, while they are good, there might be, you have the opportunity as an expert, having, you know, to guide and to help help the other judges to put themselves in the right place.
You know, the activity is in a toxic place when that instantly triggers the defense in my brain of like, oh, but then there's going to be biased judging and people. Well, you know what?
Okay, well, in a subjective, but also in a subjective activity, that's scary.
In an objective activity where we're seeking education, we're seeking truth, and we're seeking improvement, that would be normal. If you're coming in as an SME, it's because you probably know what the very top of the activity looks like, and what you as an SME are not going into that space for the first time, seeing drill and knowing and being and like having to form your opinion on what good. Lots of clients who end up going to judge at various service meets that ask instructors to judge. Looking at that, it's like, yes,
you already know what excellent is.
So much, so much, and to go in there with the right mindset can be such an asset to the students on the floor.
We have to start treating drill like it's subjective.
Not subjective?
I'm sorry. We need to start treating drill like it's objective. And that there are certain truths that you can, as as an SME is you can speak to of like, yes, that's very good and they should be, awarded high marks, or they're still working, they're still developing there, and it's okay, and
to grow.
it's okay to then let the scores reflect that. Drill in pretty much every facet is objective, and there are standards, and we can place people in the right categories.
And if you are interested in talking about what that might be, again, phone call or an email away. Seriously, it is not some even exhibition drill. If you're asked to, and by the way, my biggest beef with all of drill meets is we'll staff up color guard, we'll staff up regulation, we'll staff up inspection with people that have worn hats and badges, and we'll leave whatever is left to pour specifically on our next exhibition, and we will just say whatever you think is good and grade what you know. And it's like, but the students are putting in work, more work on exhibition than probably anything else, to be honest.
Because it's the fun thing,
and it's the thing that's keeping them engaged and in the activity.
But there are objective truths about what is harder and what is more complicated, and like when you look at the categories on any score sheet, there are objective factors in every single one of those categories that can be talked about and that should be graded, where it's not just what do you like or don't like.
Yeah, I mean, and again, unfortunately, we've asked these students to do a very specific thing, and I don't know anyone's military training background. Short of if you're in public affairs and you're a graphic art person, you would understand some of this stuff. But like, it's important that we get away from the subjectivity, because in reality, pretty much everything is objective. Pretty much everything there is better and worse use of the design elements in exhibition. There are more fundamentally correct and characteristic ways to do things in regulation and color guard and so forth. Yeah, I think we could keep going on the judging front.
No, we did it. Well, another podcast.
It lends itself perfectly into the transition of, okay, judges are going to give this type of feedback, where they're going to write these things down. And we just talked about all the different ways that judges can hope to improve, or different things that we've seen might have been negative impacts from certain individuals trying to do a certain thing as a judge. And so I think the next question is, okay, so now the judges have had the conversation. As the competitor, what am I looking for from these judges? What am I looking for in a host? How do I make sure as a competitor that the drill meets that I am taking my life to do actually have value, are additive in nature, and are not detracting from my experience as a whole? And part of that is judge comments.
And instructors, I love y'all. We think the world of you. You're doing a great service for the young people of America. I have been to very few clients, no clients, where we're having the discussion about how am I scheduling my drill season and what meets am I choosing. The amount of uncritically taking weekends away from students and their families to go to a drill meet is at an all-time high.
Well, and I think because, again, post-COVID, we're still recovering. The activity is still recovering. We're building our drill teams back up. And so I know part of is we're going to a lot of drill meets because we want to give the students something to look forward to.
Yeah, it comes from a good place. We want to show off the work they've put into it. We want them to stay engaged.
Honestly, a lot of it is this is the meet schedule that the person before I got here was running. So we just decided we're going to go to the same ones. And there's not even a second thought. It's just like we've been going to these forever, and they expect us to be there. And as a result of us going to this one, they're going to come to the one that we host. And there's a lot of we were just handed this schedule, or these are the meets that happen every year. We go to the meets that happen every year. And so I think the first thing from the competitor side, and this is an instructor thing first, and everything else kind of flows up from here, is like, you have to have the conversation about why are you going to certain meets, and what meets facilitate the best experience for your students, and what meets make sense to go to. Because after that, we can start to screen the meets that we go to by things like judges' comments. Hey, we're always going here, and the judges' comments never seem to make sense. It seems to be an outlier. Okay, well, that might change whether we schedule that meet into our season, right?
Or even worse, the comments are literally teaching us to do the wrong thing, because if we want to place well in one space,
had a client come to us and say, hey, what do we need to do here? Because the judges on our debrief, they recommended, maybe to help your alignment in color guard, you guys should be marching shoulder to shoulder instead. That would really help your alignment. And the students don't know any better.
Yeah, it was coming from a great place.
They saw him, they wanted to help him, they gave a piece of advice, and I'm sure they're using on active duty. And it's like,
That
okay,
hurts.
look at that. And then we then go down the decision tree of what to do about having received that feedback. Because so many times it's like, oh, well, they told us to march shoulder to shoulder. The judges want to see us march shoulder to shoulder, and they change it the next practice.
And unfortunately, that's not what's going to get you the actual reward for your efforts when it's, in this specific case, taking you to a season-ending drill meet that was the culmination of all of those local ones. That's preventing them from reaching that culmination because they're not scoring high enough on their next drill meets based on that feedback that was literally incorrect. And that's the thing that happens often.
Yeah.
So you need to look at a lot of things if you're on the and this now goes to the cadets. Like if you're on a drill team, you can do this. Like, yeah, the instructors need to look and they need to set the season. Okay, great. But if you are on a drill team, when you get done with that meet, first of all, you should be getting score sheets back in hand. A lot of meets will not give you score sheets.
Well, and a lot of times it's because they don't think about it, or normally nobody asks for it, and so therefore they don't bother to hand them out.
Or, and I'm going to be really honest, and if you're listening to this and it sounds like you, they don't give them out because when you give them out, you can find the mistakes. You can find the holes in the lack of the judge's briefing. You can find the holes and we didn't add the stuff right. But my whole point is this: when you get the score sheets back, look at them. We were with a client and they had just gone to a drill meet, and they were feeling really down about themselves. They felt, man, we never do well, and we really got beat up this time. So we're like, hey.
So we had them pull up the score sheets, and there was 3 judges at this meet.
And we were like, okay, let's talk through this. Look at the score sheets.
Well, and just in looking at them, we were like, oh dear.
So one of the things that had happened is that there was a penalty box, but there wasn't just a penalty box on every score sheet or on the head judge score sheet. There was a penalty box on like 3 of the score sheets or whatever. And
well, so then the first thing was when you looked at the penalties on across the 3 judges, they all had different amounts of penalties.
Let one judge think that they did this thing 3 times, one thought 1 time, one thought no times. Okay, there's a problem right there. We asked the students, like, hey, what does this tell you about the meet right just from there? They didn't print the right score sheets. Okay, they didn't print the right score sheets. Yes. What is it? What else does it tell you?
But then, 2, what we noticed is that when you read the penalty boxes, every penalty should have been equal to a 5
points
deduction.
It's a 5-point penalty. And so we look at their score. We're like, okay, let's use easy numbers because I don't remember off the top of my head. Let's say that their score was 100 points. They got 100 points or whatever. And then they got a total of 5 penalties between all the sheets. And then the other score is 95, and the 95 is circled. We asked students, they're like, hey, check it out. What's the problem with this? They're like, 5 points per penalty, got 5 penalties. 5 times 5, we should be 25. We should have had a 75. They gave us a 95. They just added the number of instances, didn't they? We're like, yeah. So what does that tell you about the meet? They're like, it was garbage. And we're like, yeah, it's not good. It's not looking good. They're like, so basically you shouldn't feel quite as bad here. Instead, let's go and look at the video that you guys had of this meet, and let's look at your score sheet, and let's see if there's anything that your expert eyes, being that you've practiced this, can correlate between what you see in the video and what the judges might have noticed themselves.
In this case, there
was very nothing. Another drill meet, and this is, again, to the point of, like, what can you do as a competitor? Look at your score sheets. We went to a drill meet with a school. We get the score sheets back. We look at the score sheets. They were a little bit bummed. I think they didn't get a first place trophy in something. They felt like they did really well. And again, we're talking about it being the outcome.
Well, and so then you look at their score sheets, and they're all in the top box. They're all almost perfect scores. And
so we're like, oh my God, what's this easy number again? You got 3rd place with a 298 out of 300. What does that tell you about who beat you? Oh, we were all within a point. Do you think that's really possible? Oh no, I guess that's not really possible. What does that tell you about the meet? They were probably just giving away numbers like, okay.
Well,
yes.
I will tell you at this meet, there was no judge's brief at all. When the inspection started, there were supposed to be 4 judges.
It started with 2. By the end, there were 4.
One judge walked in as the team was falling in, and one judge walked in at the end of the report end. So,
and you put all these things together, it's like, well, at least this can tell you, this can paint a picture of what happened at the meet. If the picture is we're feeling bad, and maybe we shouldn't feel quite as bad because we don't really have a good, clear picture of what actually happened. So let's go back to our videos and let's study up and let's use that to improve ourselves, which is what happened with both of those. It's like we can't rely on what was done. That tells us we need to lean in even harder to looking at our videos, right? And to try to figure out what we can do to be better.
Well,
you wouldn't know to do that unless you look at the score sheets.
So for competitors, we would tell you that you should be critical of the meets you go to, in that when you get at the end and you get the results, you should request your score sheets, and then you should also look at how the meet was run.
You should reserve emotional either joy or sadness.
And I would highlight the joy aspect because I think it's very easy to dismiss something, to call it trash, to call it garbage, and dismiss results. But I think it's really, really difficult as a person to also attribute that same, it wasn't actually beneficial even when you won.
So we talk about this all the time. We have this conversation constantly with schools. If the meet wasn't great, then you should not be happy about a victory, and you should not be sad about a quote-unquote loss.
Well, and so, competitors is, one, you should use how the meet was run, and how, were the scores entered accurately, was the scoring system they used.
Were the judges consistent?
And you know what? That's a wonderful exercise for your team, which is on the bus home, add up your score sheets. It can't hurt.
Always
add up your score sheets. Do not.
Never trust math, because when you've got 25 schools and 4 different events,
you got a lot of
numbers.
We mess up too. Like, as people who do meets, is we do our best to double check everything.
Sometimes
why double checks exist, is why triple checks exist, because math will math and transcription errors will occur, and meet hosts are human and will have scoring errors. So you as the competitor should always double check everything that returns to you.
But also, when you do that, you're going to get a better eye for it. Your brain starts to, do different things to the numbers. You start to see...
make connections.
You start to see the activity as a whole and how it's connected. So that...
And instructors, if you can get your hands on the overall matrix, and sometimes they'll give that out. Now, sometimes they won't. And there's usually a very specific reason why they won't. But if you can get your hands on the overall matrix, where don't ask for their whole scoring Excel sheet or whatever, but if you can see where every team placed in every event with every point value, and you can start to look at those things, you will discover just a whole different world of how you look at and how you help your team succeed as a result.
It's how you talk about it.
Then this is again somewhere on the instructor piece of the puzzle about what do you do as a competitor, what do you do as a participant. We talk about this all the time. You need to make friends, and you need to share score sheets. You need to you and your 3 other schools that you're close with, because you guys all you have a good relationship with those other schools. When the meet's done, have everyone, technology makes this real easy. Just zap a bunch of pictures and share your score sheets with your fellow friends.
And then if you want to be a nerd, put it in a spreadsheet, and you guys all share that spreadsheet, and then you can compare.
And you know what? It's just like, oh, it's so much work, and I just want to go home on Sunday. But you know what? Yes, but also your children show up to practice on a regular basis, and they give up 12 hours on a Saturday to ride to that drill meet and ride back home.
Well, and how can you give them then accurate feedback if they're spending all this time practicing on how to get better or how to improve? Or, okay, what do we take from this drill meet? How are you going to know if you don't have the whole picture?
It's just making it up at that point.
And honest to goodness, again, you would never do this, person listening. We've sat in after actions where instructors, certified junior RTC instructors, have looked their cadets in the face and after action their drill meet and just made, the judges didn't like this because this. You just made that up. We did this poorly, so this is why we scored. You just made that up. And we've watched instructors who will then admit that they just kind of made this up in order to fulfill and check the box that we did an AAR after the event. It's like, holy cow.
But what you should do is you should do an AAR, and then you should talk to your students. Your students are not stupid. Give them the reality of like, hey, these judges did their best, but they were all from this area. They were all this type, hey, it looks like, there wasn't a brief. Or these judges, they all judge all the time, and clearly having gone to lots of meets where these guys have judged, they're looking for this type of thing. Tell your students the reality.
The most successful...
Not they cheated us. Not we got screwed out of this. Not, well, they didn't like you, so blah, blah, blah. We're not talking about that.
But having them, and again, all of our most competitively successful clients are having the conversation with their students where everyone is aware of who the judging core is at this meet that we're going to and what we can expect as a result based on the historical truths of having attended this before. Like the best, like, you know, talking about what the best people are doing is they're having those conversations with the teams, because you have to have those conversations. That's part of literacy, you know, in this activity, is understanding the environment you're going into and you know, doing your scouting and doing your debriefing. So like, have those conversations with your peers, you know, share those score sheets, have those conversations. And when something doesn't seem to quite add up, this is probably the last major piece for the competitors. I'm being told there's 2 more pieces. One of those pieces is, if it starts to look like there's something fishy, you need to bring that to the attention of the host.
And then, and again, this is where we went back to, you got to talk to the people in your area. If you guys as hosts talk to the people of your area, then you as a competitor, it's going to be easier to then have the conversation, because after you have the AAR with your students, which you should do, you should then have the conversation with the host. And if it's not, and if you have a good relationship, is you're going to be able to have a conversation where
it doesn't feel like the only time they hear from you is when the sky is
where
falling.
it's not punitive, where you're not impugning them, where you're not just lambasting them for doing a horrible job, because we all know running drill meets is hard. And it's not fun.
It's a conversation of growth, how everyone can improve, because the drill meet improving based on recommendations is you're going to go back to it.
And hosts, because this is all an ecosystem, hosts, you need to be open to having those conversations, and you need to be not so elated that it's done for another 364 days that you just brain dump it. The number one problem with when people bring up legitimate concerns, and they have legitimate concerns, hey, this was an issue with the judging, this was an issue with the briefing, this was an issue with the schedule. The number one thing is because drill meets are such a bear to put on that when the moment that they are done, the host, whether they do it for a living and it's all they do, or whether they're just doing it because it's a fundraiser, everyone brain dumps the morning after the drill meet. And as a host, you have to not fall into that trap.
And as a competitor then, if you send that there and those like, thanks, period, right? Or I don't want to, or they're not uninterested, then here's what we would tell you to do. Don't go back.
You have to be able to stick to the guns. If the drill meet is not improving, the experience is not valuable for your students, stop forcing them to do it.
And you don't need to be a jerk. You don't need to go into of course
this is not an airport. This is not an airport. You don't need to announce your departure.
Just okay, well, thanks, loved it, and that's it.
And here's the thing. Here's the problem with our activity right now. Right now, because we're not thinking about this maybe from the educational perspective. It's this drill meet was bad. The judging was bad. Well, no, the judging wasn't bad. The host had an overwhelming day and forgot to fill in the blank, and et cetera, et cetera. So we're having the wrong conversation there. But then it's like, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. My kids hated it. It was, sign me up for next year. Take my money right now. And so then they show up again next year. And basic economics would tell you it's called minimum viable product. Right. If the product is viable, it will always seek the minimal amount to make it viable.
And then for house, they're going to complain. They're just a bunch of loudmouths. We're going to see them next year, so it doesn't really matter.
And shame on you, too, if that's the attitude that's being taken, right? Like, it has to be a constant conversation, because at the end of the day, this is not about adults, and this is not about programs. This is about students and their experience. And if you are taking your students back to meets that are not providing a solid experience, then we should just not go to those, right? If you've done your due diligence.
What will happen is one of two things. Either that drill meet will go away and somebody will step into that space.
When the weekend opens up, someone's going to take the fundraising.
Or they're going to say, oh, nobody wants to come back to my meet. What can we do to improve? And so it's either going to be a better meet,
or it's going to be a better meet.
Which is hopefully better.
Yeah, and that's so vitally important. Is like, if it's not serving you, and it's not serving the educational mission of your drill team, then maybe it doesn't have a place on the schedule.
Well, and again, this is where we're going to come full circle, is then a lot of times people say, well, then there's going to be no meets to go to. And we say, yep. So then what do we do? Host a meet. because here's what you can do.
If you care, listen. If you care enough, I'm sitting forward here, so I apologize if it gets louder. If you care enough to do all the things, if you're at an hour and 28 minutes into this still listening, you care, you will host a better meet.
Well, and here's what you
Simply
do.
because you care.
There are so many ways to make a drill meet educational for your students. You can sit them out at the drill floor and have them watch and have them enter scores while they're watching. And then at the end, you say, okay, well, what did you see? And then they're interacting with the...
That was part of our coaching strategy several years ago, which is we had a client and we were doing a drill meet. We had students that we were teaching and coaching. Bring them and get them involved in the process. When they see it from the other side, they'll be better educated about how to practice.
It's don't talk to the judges, but listen. And then in listening, well, what did you hear? What did you notice about the judges? And then they're going to come away from that experience having watched.
And I will tell you this, that experience from a coaching standpoint was more valuable than any meet we could have taken them to compete. More that all of a sudden they
see the inside.
They
scary.
Yeah, you see where the sausage gets made. It's like, wow, the judges, I thought they scared me so much before. They were cutting up with me. They were real people.
Right? Or, then those students who do the scoring, when they get scoring back, of course they made a mistake there. Or, this is really hard.
I really struggled with this when I was putting in the scores. I can see how this was a hard thing for them.
You can make hosting a drill meet just as educational,
more educational
as going to a drill meet.
Absolutely.
Right? Or, even at some you can let your commanders, and you don't even have to use their scores, is let them judge too. And don't even use their scores, but you can look at, they can compare to the judges they're judging with.
And build their eyes as commanders, as teachers on their team.
Exactly. And again, like, by getting, if you're willing to do all this stuff and you're willing to go to host and say, listen, I don't think this was the best and here's the thing that we can do to improve it, then you by nature are going to be open when somebody comes to your meet and comes up to you and says, I have a suggestion because we experienced this. You are going to be in the place of the good host that we talked about at the beginning.
And again, this is coming full circle by talking to the people in your area and developing a relationship. When you host, compete, and judge, and you run in those circles, and all of you work together to do that.
Swirling her hands around in a circular motion.
You got to see it's a cycle. It all feeds into itself.
And if we get going in the positive direction of, we go to a drill meet, we give the host feedback, the host, or we as the host accept that feedback
and improve.
And then we as a group, is sometimes we judge drill meets, or we have people who are judging. We have some judges who are constantly judging, and we pull them into our circle of communication. The meets are only going to get better, and the activities only going to become better. And then the students are going to know that when they go to a competition, they know what they're training for. They know and can trust that the feedback that they're given, or the people who are judging them, are going to accurately give them feedback. They're going to then be more excited about it and more enfranchised, and then they may even come back around, and then we're just going to keep getting better.
Well, in best case scenario, you have those enfranchised individuals go into the military, go into a leadership place that they learn those things, and then guess who comes back and wants to judge at those drill meets that are being hosted well. It is a cycle that will feed itself, and currently we are feeding the opposite direction, and then we're confused at why we're getting the results that we're getting when every system along the way is just not given enough support to be something that's productive and valuable for a student's time, where the world will ask them to do everything other than drill.
So those are our short thoughts, brief overview on competition as it concerns the drill team activity. Again, on a serious note, if you have questions, whether you are a competitor, whether you are an instructor, or whether you are an adult that's also involved in it, if you have questions about how to make this a better experience for cadets, for students,
please reach out to us.
Instagram at Drill Team Dynamics, drill at drill-dynamics.com. Hit us up and let's have that conversation. The more times we're having this conversation, the more light bulbs are going off with instructors and with clients. We had an instructor seminar last month. We'll have another one this coming month. When you have these conversations, there are people out there who are going to do a good job, and this activity is going to move forward.
And again, the activity is not in a good place right now because everybody thinks the other one is stupid or doesn't care. And everybody does. And we have found that all of you care. None of you are stupid. And we need to start to change the language. And we are not in opposition. The competitors are not the opponent of the host. The judges are not the opponent of the competitors. let it be what it is. We can talk about this. I can see him getting ramped up, right? But we are not in competition with each other. We are not.
The language around this, if it's not an adversarial relationship, well, of course the system is stuck up and toxic right now because it's an adversarial relationship.
It's tear down.
Parties. It's a tear down system, but you know what? We live in a build up system, and we live in an ecosystem that's connected, right? And we have to be moving it in that direction if we want our students to justify the time that we're putting in the drill team. If we want that to mean something, then we have to move in that direction. That's the bottom line.
Wait, we're not in opposition. We can all be in fellowship, and because remember, at the end of the day, this is a children's activity, and it is our job as adults to facilitate an educational experience where the students are rewarded properly for the effort they are putting in, where they are being graded accurately and being given feedback accurately that is actually because remember, this is not subjective, right? Is we are actively, objectively giving them feedback based on what they are doing.
If we work together in partnership, this can happen. I believe this can happen. I believe that we're in the beginning of the renaissance of the drill team activity that's going to make it even better than it's ever been before. So hopefully this has been a good hour and a half window into what we sit around and talk about, because we do a lot of competition stuff. We're asked constantly. We have many drill meet clients. We're always asked about briefing and judging and so on and so forth. Hopefully this is a good insight into the conversations we're having. And hopefully, the things you take away will help you, whether you are a competitor or a judge or a meet host or considering hosting a meet. And if you care very deeply and you think you could do a great job, please reach out if you think you could take that step and just need a little bit of guidance. Like we said before, the phone call is free. There's nothing we would love more than to spend hours talking to you about how to do a better job, even if you decide not to involve us professionally. That's not part of the agenda here. It's all really wrapped around what can we do to make the competitions an educational experience as well.